You own a 6.7 Cummins? Well, let me show you how this little nut right here can cost you an entire engine. It's Bolts with Tone here, guys, and today I have a 2014 Ram Cummins here with an intake system problem, intake air heater system problem. So this is the intake air heater right here. Cummins doesn't have glow plugs, they have an intake air heater. As the air passes through, it heats up, goes into the engine. Well, it's all powered by a post here, which is right here. And this post is attached by a nut under here. Okay, so this truck came in and it had this problem. It had an aftermarket relay on there, meaning that the guy had been chasing this for a while. I grabbed this post right here and I could wiggle it like this in the truck. So I told the customer I wouldn't drive it. If you're not going to fix it, don't drive it. So he fixed it. As I disconnected this post right here, this fell over like this. Okay, so I took this off, and under here, I took this little nut right here in my hand and I had it like this. And I told the service advisor, I said, as I touched it, I said, this, and it literally came off in my hand. This thing was possibly one start away from falling into the engine and causing catastrophic engine failure, which would be an engine replacement. Now I'm going to show you how to replace this in this video. So that way, hopefully this doesn't happen to you. Before we get started, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell. You get notified of all my future content, which you definitely don't want to miss. Let's jump right in.
All right, so you're going to take off your little vanity cover here and your engine oil dipstick, just 4/8. Now we need to get the EGR pipe off. So you're going to have a clamp on each side. All right. Now on the side on the driver's side, there's going to be a gasket that's a little thicker. And on the passenger side is a very, very thin gasket. So I have taken this tube off without replacing the gaskets. Just make sure you put the gaskets back. So I'm going to replace them in this video. However, you can get away with it as long as you don't lose them.
All right, so we need to disconnect. We need to get this disconnected here, this intake horn here. So to do that, we got to pop off all these connectors here, okay? We're going to undo that clamp right there and separate this boot so the boot can come off. And we're going to lift this whole thing up from here all the way to here, and we're going to lift it out. We got to disconnect a few things here on the dipstick like this. You're going to unbolt the dipstick here and down there. That way the dipstick can move. You're going to have some connectors here. Now you want to make sure that nut right there, that's not hot, okay? So if you think that somebody might turn the key on, then you want to disconnect the batteries. So that nut needs to be not hot, no power. Just to be certain, go ahead and pop off these two right there. Pop this one off and pop that one off. So that way the solenoid can't get energized. Just to be safe, before you go and mess with that, a test light, power probe, whatever, you want to touch it here and make sure that there's no power before you disconnect this and make sparks. So you can see how loose that is right there. Look at that. Should not be that loose. So you're going to want to go ahead and disconnect these PCV hoses here and also your injector harness through the valve cover here. Go ahead and get that disconnected. We need to get this big foam cover out of here. All right, so ultimately you need to get this off right here. It goes like that over all the fuel lines and everything. You also want to disconnect all these harnesses. So both injector harnesses, your crankcase pressure over here, you're going to have, you have different connectors here. You want to go ahead and get all those disconnected. So that way we can disconnect these plastic clips here and we can move this harness out of the way. So once you get everything disconnected, you can go ahead and shove all this harness down here under the dipstick like that. The only thing is you have to remember that the harness goes above this point right here. So before you put all this back together, you got to get the harness out.
So the first step in doing this, you got to take out this front fuel line, fuel tube here. It's a 19 milli on both ends, and you should be able to break it loose with a wrench. And then we got to get this intake air horn out of here.
So before you do that, you want to take an air nozzle and blow all this debris out of here. All that debris is going to go in your intake. You got leaves back here. You want to blow all that away. And then we're going to take this fuel line off. So as long as you break this hose free right here, as soon as you take that fuel line off and get these bolts out, you got one bolt there. You got bolts around the perimeter. This whole EGR air horn here comes off, throttle body, everything. You don't have to mess with any of this. But look at how nasty that is.
Unfortunately, this is what emissions and EGR does to engines.
The next step, we need to get the fuel rail out of here. And to do that, we have to take all these fuel lines out of here. So keep track of which one goes where. And you're going to have a supply here. You're going to have these two hoses here. You have to disconnect both of those. All right. Make sure your fuel rail pressure sensor is disconnected. All right. Or no, that's your intake air sensor. Your pressure sensor's in the back, I believe. Anyways, you got to get all that disconnected. We got to get this rail off of here because this is the intake manifold that we got to get out of here. Okay. So one of the things that you do is this supply tube right here. You're going to loosen that on the high pressure pump. And that way, when you loosen this right here, it falls out of place. This guy here doesn't need to be moved. Just know that there's a gasket on both sides of this banjo. You're going to come through here. You're going to be disconnecting all these because we need to get this fuel rail out of here. All right, so now you got all the fuel lines off of here. We needed to get that connector disconnected at the back, and we have to take out all the fuel rail bolts. Now, this one here, it bolts down the dipstick tubes.
So you want to just draw yourself a picture because that one right there, we're not putting that in. There's a stud right there, and the other two are bolts. And all the fuel tubes are 19 milli on both ends. And the fuel line that connects to the side of the fuel rail is a 17 milli. So one tool that really helps me with this job is this Capri Tools angled wrench. Now I think it's a 30-degree angle on one end and a 60 on the other. So when you flip it around, you have 4 different angles. And that actually helped me get these fuel lines disconnected and make this job a piece of cake. Go to Capri Tools and use code TONE10 for 10% off. And that's just to help you guys out. But this really makes this job a lot easier.
Once you get down to this point, you only have 4 bolts. So you got a stud back there. You got 2 bolts over here. And you got 1 bolt here. And as you can see right here, look what happened. Literally snapped off. So what you can do if you can draw yourself a picture, or like I just put a B and a B and a B and then an S. And so I know that those 4 bolts, I keep them all together. So those are for the fuel rail. Those are for the intake horn. And then I'll put another set over here, which is for the intake, just to keep them separate. So this little hole right here, look at how much metal you can see. You can almost only barely see a little point right in that hole there. So this is a 6.7 Cummins, and this is the nut on the bottom side of this intake air heater. And look at this. Look at all the carbon. And the fact that all you see is carbon means that this thing was only holding on by a strand. Told this customer if they didn't want to fix it, they should tow it. This was just super loose. Just fell off once I unbolted the fuel rail. But this guy got so lucky. Look at that. 6.7 Cummins. So now that we've got everything off, next up, we need to clean this surface here and then use a vacuum, suck all this carbon out of here. Okay, try to get as much carbon out as you can. From there, the next step, and this is super important, it's right here is a fuel connector tube. So what this does is you have your injector, which is inside the head about over here. And what this is a tube that has 2 sets of threads. It has external threads over here that thread into the head. Then it has threads here for the fuel tube to connect to. So this threads in and it pushes into the injector. So as this is torqued in, that is creating the seal at the injector to the tube, which then comes out and goes to the fuel tubes to the rail. What happens on these, and this is super common, is people take these apart, take these fuel tubes off, and they don't ever check these. And then you end up having drivability issues because you're having little tiny air leaks, fuel leaks, things like that. And so anytime I take this apart, I always go and I retorque these connector tubes, all of them. So the torque specs for the engine going forward is going to be 41 foot-pounds. For these connector tubes, your fuel tubes that go from the rail to here are going to be 30 foot-pounds at both ends. And your intake manifold bolts are going to be 18 foot-pounds. So super important. Make sure that you torque those connector tubes. So I just did all the connector tubes here, and I want to show you something. So the back connector tube back there, way back there, you can't get a 1/2-inch torque wrench and a 24mm socket on there. But what you can do is you can get these guys here. So it's 24mm for those connector tubes. So this is a Capri Tools 24mm, super stubby 1/2-inch drive socket. So when you put it on here on this torque wrench, this is a 1/2-inch drive snap-on flex head, you can see this is the size of a regular socket. With this on there, it fits. Now let me tell you, this is the only connector tube that did not turn. Every one of these connector tubes turned. Sometimes it only turned about this much, and some of them turned quite a bit. I had a few that turned like that, and then I had a couple that turned all the way like that. That's going to create a drivability problem, and that's why you want to check this while it's apart. So you can see here, we got this, I kind of just ran a screwdriver through here, got most of the carbon up and with a vacuum, and got the surface all cleaned up. So now we're going to go ahead and set this intake on here and get this torque. Now remember, what you want to do is you want to put your intake on, and I would put a couple bolts up here just to make sure it's lined up, and then go ahead and put those bolts in, torque it down. That way, when you put the rest of the components in here, it all torques down properly. If you torque just those 4 bolts and then you come up here, it's not going to be quite right. It's not going to sit. This intake's not pinned, so it's not going to be completely right. So have a couple bolts here started. Make sure this is all lined up. Torque that down, and let's get the fuel rail on. Also, don't forget to get your sensor out of here and go ahead and wire brush it and get all the carbon off, and then transfer this to your new intake right here. All right, so here's what it should look like when you put your fuel rail on. You should have a stud back here. You should have nothing here because your oil dipstick tube bolts down through there. You should have a stud back here. I mean, a bolt back here, a bolt there, a bolt there, a bolt here, a bolt right on the other side of this intake heater connection, and then a stud. So then so what I did was like I showed you, I put these 2 up here, just threaded them in, just to have them in place to make sure that everything is lined up correctly. So from here, I'm going to torque all these to 18 foot-pounds. Don't forget to connect your connector back there for your fuel rail pressure sensor. And then also, don't forget to connect your, right here, you got this tube here that's going to connect your fuel rail. Actually, before you torque your fuel rail, you may want to go ahead and get this started because your fuel rail will move around, and then you'll have a little bit of movability with it. So you're going to want to start in the back and go ahead and torque each one as you go because the next one will be in the way. So put the back one in and torque it. And so what I've been using for just about this whole thing is the Capri Tools Mini 3/8 drive torque wrench. It's real small. It's real long and skinny. I've been using the Sunex Tools flare nut wrench here and just a 3-inch Koken extension. So been using this, and I've torqued every one of these so far.
So now you want to go and you want to make sure that you've torqued everything. You torque your feed supply right there at your high pressure pump. I just snugged this one up with the 17. And as long as everything is tight, we can move on to the oil dipstick.
And next up, we want to make sure that we want to get this back in place. So we need to get the harness back up here. And then what you got to do is you got to get your air horn here. You want to get this cleaned up. All right, scrape your carbon off here. Get your gasket surface clean. Get a new gasket, set a gasket in place. Okay, if you didn't get new gaskets for this stuff here, okay, you got to get new gaskets for your EGR tube. All right, you got a gasket on each side. Get all that, and then we're going to set this in the hose and then put it in place and get all the bolts started. All right, so before we do a whole lot here, you want to just kind of move your harness the way it needs to go. All right, now we want to put this gasket in place. We're going to go ahead and slip this horn in here. Then we're going to start getting everything hooked up, and then we'll hook up this last fuel line here. Everything else should be hooked up minus the electrical. Just make sure the electrical is on the inside of the oil dipstick. We're not bolting this down yet. We can come through here with the ratcheting wrench and get that out. So once you get the last fuel line torqued in here, I just go snug and go just a tiny bit more. Make sure all your fuel lines are connected. Make sure all your electrical is connected. Leave this side of the dipstick disconnected and go ahead and pull your harness back like this. And now we got to get that foam piece in there. And then once we get the foam piece in there, we got to connect the PCVs and then connect the rest of the harness, and then we'll roll it over.
So then once you've got your intake air heater wire run through, you've got your nut tightened here, it's run underneath the dipstick, and it's connected over there. You also have it connected to the dipstick. Then we're going to go ahead and move on to the EGR tube. And the EGR tube is going to have a really thin gasket on the passenger side and a thicker, like graphite type gasket on the driver's side, which will actually push onto the tube and stay there. All right, so now we got to put the foam piece in. Now, the foam piece was a pain to get out because it goes up and over all the fuel lines, and there's one fuel line at the very back that sticks up that makes things quite difficult. So when we're putting it in, you want to make sure that you have your harness, everything is laying correctly. And we're going to shove this in. We have to lift it up to get over the back. And once we do, it'll just set right in because it's molded. That's how it's been, just like that. So once you get it over the fuel lines, you're going to have your open connectors for the valve cover, and just make sure that they're not pushed in there. And you need to be under the PCV hoses, or under the PCV ports, I should say, on the valve cover. Then you're going to clip your harness to the dipstick like this. And then we're going to start connecting the harness. So once you get that clipped in, you're going to connect your front valve cover connector or into your injectors. Then we're going to lay the harness the way it goes because it's going to go up and over the valve cover. You're going to go ahead and connect the rear valve cover connector or valve cover gasket connector. And then you're also going to connect the one connector in the back. Now make sure that it clicks, and then also make sure you slide the safety lock in place. That tells you that the connector is all the way seated. Otherwise, it could not be seated. As you bring it around the back, there's a couple locator plastic pieces like that gray right there that locate the harness on studs through the PCV, the crankcase filter on top of the valve cover. You want to make sure those are clipped in because that also helps you route your harness the correct way. And then we're going to go ahead and connect this one and this one over here and your crankcase pressure sensor connector. Make sure they're all clipped in. Next up, we have the crankcase pressure hoses and also the PCM harness. So you're going to have your rear crankcase hose that was pushed way down out of the way because that one's easy to move way down. The front one stays kind of up and in the way. Then we're going to have the front one there. And then also you want to make sure that this big harness here lays the right way. Go ahead and clip it into your oil dipstick tube. There's a little spot on there where the Christmas tree clips in. And then make sure that your lever is all the way forward like that before you try to connect this big connector. And as you push it in, the lever pulls it in and snaps it together like that. And then we have the harness here that goes down to the throttle body. So we have a pressure sensor connector right there. And again, make sure these all click in. And then the throttle body one's a little bit harder because it's around and you can't really see it without a mirror. And it has a lock tab also. And then you want to make sure that your clamp for your charge air pipe or charge air hose is routed correctly like that.
All right, so once we get to that point, now we want to, now be careful with this so you don't touch the battery with it. I almost actually did that. So we want to run this in. You want to kind of make sure it's lined up. Okay, we're going to go, so it gets a little snug.
So then after that, what I like to do is I get a hand ratchet and I just kind of snug it up by hand with a small ratchet so I don't strip it out. So now I got to be careful because I usually use my blue handled snap-on ratchet, which is shorter than this one. And so I'm just going to lightly crank on it and get that
snug. Now you want to make sure it's snug because this will give you a code for a charge air leak, pressure difference between, both sides of the cooler. And you're going to have a couple connectors here, one to the EGR and then one goes to the EGR tube. So then you're going to have a nut here for the top of the dipstick, your last, not a nut, but a bolt for the dipstick, top of the dipstick. And I'm not going to tighten it yet because we have a few things to put on. So this is the power wire for the intake air heater, the whole reason we're doing this job. So you're going to have a zip tie on the connector here that zips it to the oil dipstick. What I did was I just released the little clip and pulled it out so I could reuse it. Then you're going to have a nut over here in front of the air horn, which secures the wire there so it doesn't move around because this is a fragile post. And then the other end on the plastic post. Now you want to be careful that you don't break this off. It's very, very flimsy. So then what I do is I grab my electric ratchet here and I just lightly run them in. So the one that's in front of the intake horn, that one's a stud. You can just run that in, and also the dipstick to bolt. But the one for the other one, you want to just barely snug it up. I mean, don't take any chances. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a ratcheting wrench here, 10 milli, and it's actually a gear wrench, ratcheting wrench. I've had it for probably 15 years, a whole set. Anyways, you're going to just run that in until it's snug. You want to kind of hold the wire to the left and then give it just a little push, make sure it's nice and tight. Now, if you disconnected them, you need to come over here to the relay here and connect your two little wires to the relay because otherwise you'll have a code and you'll think that you didn't fix it. And last up is the EGR tube.
All right, last step that really needs any sort of instruction is you have your graphite gasket here. You want to replace that. If you don't, I've done it without replacing it before. So you're going to have this clamp is here. That clamp is there. You're going to have this thin metal gasket over here, okay? So we're going to push this in. Be careful because you could lose this little metal one over here. It's a pain. Okay, so now once you get that in, so now you want to try to get your clamp on so that way it holds it together because there's a lip inside there that should stay and keep your gasket on. Now this side pushes on, so this side, you won't lose this side. So now the only thing that you really want to do is make sure that you have this positioned correctly because you're going to have a plastic cover that's going to go over here. So here, let's go ahead and, so what I would suggest is you kind of run this in, get it a little snug, okay? Do the same thing over here. Okay, so that's snug. So now let's do this so we don't forget, okay? Push your clip in. Now, let's make sure that this goes on before you do anything else because if you don't have your clamps right, this won't go on. So you can see we're clear here and we're clear and we're not clear here. This clamp has to be rotated to the back a little bit more. Okay, like that, I think. All right, now let's try it and see. And now you can feel under here and you can see that looks like we're clear. So that's good. So now we can snug these up.
So I usually run them in with the electric ratchet, sometimes even my bigger gun. But once it gets to where it touches, I like to use the hand ratchet because that really gives me a good feel as to when it's snug and not too tight.
All right, there's that. Now, put this on. Make sure you don't have any bolts left except for bolting this up. The last step is to clear the codes, but before you clear them, why don't you read them? Because if you left anything disconnected, then you would possibly have a code for that. So right now we have the intake air hist system performance code, but we don't have any other codes, meaning that most likely we didn't leave anything disconnected, which is important. So we'll clear the fault code. Okay. All right. And now we just need to cycle it, run it through, make sure that we're all good.
All right, the last thing I forgot to tell you is before you try to start it, cycle the key, turn it on. Leave it on for 15, 20 seconds. Turn it back off. Cycle it back on. Do that a few times. Make sure your fuel bowl fills up. Make sure it fills everything up. Then go ahead and crank it because remember we had the whole high pressure fuel system disconnected from the pump up. So everything was disconnected. So we had to fill all that and it has to bleed. Shouldn't have a hard time bleeding as long as you don't have a problem. If you have a problem, if you have a hard time bleeding it, that means you have a fuel system problem. So it should be good to go. This one took a couple tries of cranking it, and here we are running no code. So
after watching this video, I'm sure you'll see that it's not that difficult to do this job. Now, you do need some crow's foot. You do need some special tools to do this job because of the fuel lines, things like that. It's not super difficult. However, you do need a torque wrench. You do need some crow's foots. So drop a comment down below and let me know if you have this problem, if you went back with the intake air heater from Dodge or the original intake air heater, or if you opted out of this and you went to the bank system or a different system. Or let me know if this is just out of your realm and you're gonna take it to a shop. So thanks for watching. See you guys next time.